Great. Well, thank you, and I really appreciate it. And yes, I know we're working on some titles now for next year, so we'll start working through that and reorganizing. This topic, the porcelain margin or the porcelain margin fit, I think we touched on a little bit in 2022. I kind of went back and looked at it a little bit to see what we did, and I found it kind of interesting in the sense because, you know, in some ways it's a topic that people will maybe ask in this day and age, why do we care about ceramic margins at all? I mean, let's be realistic in the sense that there's a lot of monolithic work and micro layered work, and it's something that people are maybe not diving into as much. Well, I wanted to kind of touch on why I think this is important. So first off, I did a lecture back in 2006. So you guys do some quick math, you realize that's like 17 years ago, right? And in that lecture, I did it with a friend of mine down in Cornell, and it was a lecture we did in Chicago. And in that lecture, we talked about the ceramic margin, and we also introduced some monolithic zirconias. And it was really funny because that was 2006, and all those years ago, the concept of doing a ceramic margin and why we were doing it and why monolithic materials would also be kind of our future were the kind of key of the conversation. And back then, let's be honest, most of the ceramic margins we did were metal ceramics, right? So I was using metal ceramic coping, cutting back the margin, and I was doing 360 ceramic margins with feldspathic metal ceramic materials, right? And that was kind of the whole plan of it. Well, I have to be honest with you that when we taught it back then, we taught it for a specific reason. And we taught it because if you look at what a natural tooth looks like with some sort of a structure on it, and let's be honest, most of the substructures back in 2006 were more metal ceramic, but I can get the exact same effect if I put a zirconia coping, a lithium disilicate coping over a natural tooth. And the effect I'm talking about is this, the shadowing that creates over a natural tooth. Now, those of you who are big into monolithics today say, well, you know, the monolithics look so nice. They do, they look really nice. They've improved tremendously. But how much nicer do they look than some of the other materials and restorations that we have? And what was interesting back in that lecture, one of the other things that I think I put a slide in here today to kind of emphasize was, as we were introducing this monolithic concept, I was also giving a warning. And the warning that I gave was, how will you differentiate yourself in the future? And what I didn't want the people in the audience to get was that if we all started selling monolithic molars and making them faster and cheaper and stronger, the message back then was, don't have a race to the bottom. Don't just try to beat each other lab out by being $1 cheaper. It was going to be about the quality. And the quality for me was really what was important. So today, if you're in the analog world and you're still doing ceramic margins and layering ceramic, I'm going to make the argument that you have probably a good strength in your laboratory, because as I travel around the world, I find the labs that are still very artistic and creative with a brush are usually extremely busy. And the labs that are artistic and creative with a mouse are also busy. But the ones that are in the middle, that are kind of, you know, following that monolithic, how cheap and fast can I sell it, are the labs that are struggling more and more. So I don't want that to be the challenge for us. Also, when I start to get into this more digital world, notice the difference in restorations, right? Notice what a natural tooth looks like here, and notice what a lithium disilicate restoration looks like next to it. And part of the problem with that is because there is no fluorescence in lithium disilicate, there's no fluorescence in zirconia, and by the way, there was no fluorescence in PFM too. We just figured out how to make it fluoresce. And you also notice that even denture teeth today are kind of utilizing the same concepts of nature and incorporating fluorescence into the denture teeth as we go through the process. So let me just prove to you my point before we go too far into this. Here are two zirconia crowns, and I actually tried the zirconia crowns in the mouth before I put ceramic on them. The one that you see all the way here to your left is a zirconia crown with a zirconia margin. So the margin is right down to the interface. The one you see to the right of that, the 2-1 or the number 9, is a zirconia coping, but a ceramic margin on it. And you should already notice that there's a little bit more light coming through that way because the ceramic margin is allowing some of the light to get in here. And when I finalized those 2 teeth, I left one purposely this way, and I actually redid it later on because I just wanted to be able to show it, how when I just cover the root with a margin, zirconia, lithium disilicate, or metal ceramics, I lose the ability to track the light into the natural tooth and highlight the tissue, kind of like what you see at the adjacent tooth next to it. Now, to be fair, is my light a little bit more in the angle here? Probably. But I think you could see even in this area how much darker that root area looks just because of the fact it's creating a shadow. So for me, what's really the difference is utilizing some of these marginal fits and marginal materials to make even my modern materials look better. And just for all honesty, when I first started doing zirconia, I was doing zirconia ceramic margins. And by 2010, 11, 12, I stopped because the zirconias got better, the translucencies of the material were a little bit better, and I started just kind of thinning out the zirconia margin and then building my ceramic. Well, I realized somewhere along the line, probably around 2016, 17, that I was wrong. That even though the zirconia was slightly more translucent, it still created the same gray and shadowing effect. And the case you're looking at in front of you was actually done in 2018 or 19. And this is where I really started realizing that I still needed to expose my tooth surface to a fluorescent material or a margining material, which is what I started doing. So today, whether it's old school PFM or zirconia or lithium disilicate, I'm really trying to create that ceramic margin because that's what's going to give me the best light transfer into the tissue, and that's what I'm really looking for in almost any case that I do. And like I said, back then in 2006, my warning was, don't be racing to the bottom and just doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. Differentiate yourself, and that would be what would make you strong. Well, now 17 years later, I can tell you that most of the phone calls that I receive from doctors are ones that say, hey, I hear you still use a lot of feldspathic ceramics. I hear you do feldspathic veneers, and you're still layering, and that's why we're interested in using you. And I have somewhat of a waiting list of doctors that, you know, we're lucky enough and honored enough that they want to work with us, that we're not desperate for the work, and we just try to choose the right people at this point. So my point is don't think that just because monolithic materials are great, and they are, that's the only way that you should be in the market. You should be covering different areas and different values of the market. Now, I mentioned to Jim before that I just came back from Toronto, and in Toronto, I did a lecture on Thursday and then 2 courses on Friday and Saturday, hands-on, and they were one-day courses. And for my Toronto friends that were there, I apologize for squeezing in so much information in one day. It's kind of the way I roll sometimes, but we actually did this as a Lumex course. And even though it's a lithium disilicate or zirconia powder, one of the first things that we did in the course was exactly what I'm talking about now. So these are the dyes that we use for the course. And you can see here that I did a small cutback on the margin. And I'm going to take that margin and I'm going to actually start utilizing some either margin material or a liner material, or if you want to change it, the name would be fancy like we're doing in the Lumex kit, the power wash material. But in the end, the goal is the same. I'm using a higher firing material that's higher in fluorescence. That's really what the simplicity of it is. So just to go backwards a little bit, a quick margin technique. For those of you who aren't familiar with how I do margins, I'll kind of walk you through that. And I've showed this before. So we'll start on all the way to the left of the screen. When normally I'm fitting a coating, whether it's zirconia or lithium disilicate or metal ceramics, I want to make sure that the fit of the coating onto the die is correct. And if I turn that over, you notice that the die doesn't come falling off. So I usually don't cut the ceramic margin back until the coping is done. And I'm kind of doing the same thing in zirconia, meaning that I'm not designing it with the margin pre-cut back. I'm fitting the coping first and then cutting the margin back. I'm not using any fancy liquids when I build my margin materials. I'm actually only using my same buildup liquid. And then the only other thing that I'm doing is on the dye itself, I'm using an alcohol-based separator. And then I'm placing my ceramic material on the coping and then pushing it down to the area into where I'm filling the margin. So again, to the left of the screen, I'm building up my ceramic by the coping down into the margin area. And then when I get that done, I'm gonna vibrate that so I create kind of a nice little donut shape. I'm blow drying that, about blow dryer. And then when I'm all done, I'm just gonna remove the coping carefully. And always the trick is to look at your margin and dye and make sure that's all kind of clean and neat. And in the end, what you should see, and again, just to be really clear, same exact thing for zirconia. This is no different. This is what I'm doing in almost every zirconia case that I have. I may not always be doing 360 margins. Sometimes I'm only doing 180. Maybe that's a cheating way today because I do have a little more translucent zirconia on the lingual, but I'm also still always doing the zirconia margin. And another big trick for you here is the hair dryer. We had to run out to the store and get a hair dryer because I forgot to take mine. We were in Toronto the other day, and how fancy the hair dryer is up to you. But in the end, you still want to have that hair dryer to kind of take the moisture out before you remove the actual ceramic from the dye itself. And that's kind of important to me. Also notice that the emergence of the ceramic is very similar to what the CEJ will be. You kind of get this little bulge around the CEJ. And part of the reason for this is I'm following the CEJ shape, but also to be clear, ceramic shrinks to the greatest mass. So if I build my ceramic up tall like this, it's going to shrink up and down. If I build it out wide, it's going to kind of shrink in and out. So I'm kind of controlling the shrinkage by getting more. And again, this is what we did in Toronto. For those of you who weren't there with us, we took a single unit, and I actually taught everybody the margin trick with our little hair dryer, but I took it to another level, just so you're clear. Not only did we do our ceramic margin, but hey, since we already have the ceramic margin on and we have to fire it, now's a good time to do what I would call our wash bake on our coping. So in this case, I used the LL2, which is the Power Wash 2, and then I went to the LL0, which is basically a very white material. And that's also in the Power Wash kit for the Lumex. And then we fired that. I think I actually used a 3 maybe because this is pretty dark. I wasn't sure if it was 2 or 3, whichever one I used, but you get the idea. And kind of look what happens to my coping. So not only do I now have that fluorescently ceramic margin that's going to help me get light into this tissue, but at the same time, the kind of silly wash bakes that everybody's doing, I now have a wash bake that gives me the value up and down the line angles and brightens up my cervical or middle third of the tooth. And then after that, I'll do my standard buildup. And this is the buildup that we just did in the Toronto courses, a little tiny bit of opacious dentin, my dentins, and finishing off my canvas and the mammillon materials and so forth, kind of like I would normally do in a normal buildup. So for me, that's the same process over and over again. And the only thing that I'm probably doing slightly different today that I was doing a few years back is I'm not going as crazy designing my zirconia copings, especially if you're doing lingual zirconia. I'm not having Jen in my office or the designer in your office give me all these ins and outs and bulges that I was doing with zirconia years ago. And the reason I'm not doing that is because when I do my wash bake, I kind of want to add that in my fluorescent materials. So I'll do my margin and then I'll just add my blue translucent or I'll add my fluorescent bright white material to give me what I want at that moment of the coping. And I feel like this is what I call the ultimate wash bake. And it's really interesting to me as I travel around and I ask people what their wash bake is. Every technician has a different answer for their wash bake. Who's doing it, who sandblasts, who does it? Who's using a dentin material and firing high, who's painting stains on and then coming back and putting a Glaze material over because they heard that's a better bond. And I hear all these different stories, and I'm going to say one of them is kind of more goofy than the other. For me, I'm taking the zirconia, I'm sandblasting my zirconia, and then my wash bake is fluorescent material, fluorescent margin, and a fluorescent brightness. The only other thing that I would do that I probably have changed is If I have a lingual zirconia wall here, I'm not using a powder here anymore. I'm just painting stain right on that. So I'd paint my stain right on the coping, and then I'd run my mamelon materials, or my margin materials, I should say, right over the blue stain. And I made this slip up of calling the mamelon materials on kind of purpose, because I'm using my margin material like a mamelon material, right? I'm using it to start to give me, especially when I'm in the micro layered world, to give me a little bit of that effect that I'm looking for. And that's kind of the same process for me over and over again. So in the end, what am I looking for? Is something kind of along these lines. I'm creating this heavy fluorescent area. I'm brightening up with a whiter brighter, and then I can either use it to create some sort of a little mamelon effect, or maybe just up and down the line angles, depending on if it's going to be a lingual zirconia or a full buildup on my coping. I'm kind of treating it the same way. And this to me is kind of one of my favorite photos, because look at what I did with these basic copings, right? I have lingual zirconia, and everything I said I was going to do, I did. I painted a bluish gray stain around them. I used a high chroma intense marginal material around the cervical, so which gave me a marginal seal and light into the tissue and lights up the tooth. It gave me 3 or 4 different things. And why I was doing that, I took some brighter, whiter marginal material, liner material, power wash, whatever you choose to call it, they're all kind of the same. And I would brighten up my middle third of the tooth and up and down my line angles, and just started to put a little bit of a mamelon structure in there just to get started. But I had enough room that I could layer on this case, so I didn't really need to create the mamelons there. But what I've really done, if I've managed the chroma in the cervical, the value in the middle third, and the age of the restoration that I'm trying to make, a more youthful or a younger tooth, depending on what it is, which case I'm actually working on. Another thing I use margin materials for is not only for every case today, but sometimes if I go back either with metal ceramic abutments or titanium abutments, I'm also using them. And in cases like this, and I won't walk you through this whole case because I've showed this case too many times for my liking, but just so we're clear, I have an implant here in the 2, 3, or the number 11, depending on where you're from. And that implant, you should notice that the patient looked like they were kind of a brachial facial patient, but if I get that lip up there, I can start to see the tissue. So for me, I really wanted to use an abutment that would allow some light to go through that tissue and not create a gray shadow. And by the way, to take this photograph, I'm just taking the flash off of my camera, putting it behind the model, and then taking the picture. So this kind of helps me understand what tissue I'm working with. And in this case, it's a Bio 1. It's a very thin tissue, which means if I put titanium behind it or a metal abutment behind it, I'm going to get some shadowing on that root, and I don't really want that. So in the end, I decided to use a metal abutment, but what we did was I actually cut the metal abutment back, created a little bit of a space here, and used the fluorescent margin material to fill in the area to keep the tissue as bright or reflecting light as I wanted it to. Now, one of the questions that I've been getting a lot is, can we do this with titanium? And I know that the Lumix kit has some opaques in it, and it is recommended to use on titanium. I'll be honest and say, I don't use a lot of ceramics on titanium personally. That doesn't mean you can't. I know people are doing it. I find it challenging that the grade of titanium that you use, and every time you fire it, it's increasing oxides, and it just becomes problematic. So for me, if this had to be a titanium abutment, I would opt to use composite material here and a composite kind of a marginal liner material there. In this case, this was a gold abutment, so I was able to actually put pure ceramics on it, and that makes it a little bit easier for me. But I think for me, I struggle a little bit with the titanium world. I know the Lumix works on it, but I feel like it's a little bit easier solution, I think, for me to use a composite or a different type of an abutment. So in this particular case, you see I made the abutment margin. I wound up coming back with an old school metal ceramic crown. And again, it could have been zirconia, it wouldn't have mattered. If it was zirconia, by the way, the only thing I would have done differently here was I would have opaqued the abutment itself with a colored opaque. And by the way, usually I'm doing that with composite. So let's say I'm doing a titanium abutment. I'm usually doing a composite bonder on the abutment and then using a zirconia coping over it. In this case, it was an older case, so it was metal ceramic. But now look what I have. I have a ceramic margin on my abutment, and I have a ceramic margin on the restoration itself. And then you'll notice that when I put that in the mouth, you can kind of see the ceramics underneath the tissue here, and watch what happens as we put that intraoral. And again, I always like to say this is a veneer. These are all veneers, and this is a metal implant crown. And look at the difference, how nice the tissue looks kind of across the arch. So I think it's really important that we manage that tissue kind of across the restoration portfolio, that we're really kind of looking at not only just putting restorations in and making them better and stronger and more digital, but thinking through what our end goal is and what we're trying to achieve as we're walking our way through. Okay, I thought I would kind of work through one case with you today to finalize these thought concepts. And it's kind of an interesting case because I just showed this actually with one of my doctors in Chicago. Miles Cohn and I lectured in Chicago about a week and a half ago now, 2 weeks ago. I'm confused. I was in Canada, then Chicago, then back in Canada. So it's been I don't know if I know what day it is today. So this is Emma, and this was a really interesting case because Emma had presented to another dentist, not one of the dentists I work with. And she presented because she's a young patient and she didn't like the graying. She had some trauma around the tooth and she didn't like the graying. And besides for the trauma, I mean, she does have a little layer for set and some chipping here. And, you know, if I'm diagnosing this occlusally, I'd probably say besides for whatever trauma she suffered, that she definitely has a little bit of a constricted envelope, right? That we should probably, maybe these teeth should be orthodontically stripped and moved to pull them back a little bit and create a little more envelope space. And I could probably do the same with the upper teeth. I could tip in the lateral a little bit and maybe tip out the other lateral and design them a little bit better. Well, that's what I would do. And probably 99% of the dentists that I work with would be thinking exactly along the same lines. Unfortunately for Emma, she didn't go to one of those dentists. She went somewhere else. And I don't know who she went to or anything about the person that she went to. I do know that they talked her into doing 6 veneers rather than just addressing the immediate needs. And by the way, during those 6 veneers, they didn't address the occlusal aspects and the other problems. So this poor young girl now has all her front teeth prepped out, and the provisionals were made. And I think if I take a good look at these provisionals, you should see right away lots of issues going on besides for the inappropriate shapes and the tissue contour and the size of the connectors and the fact that the occlusion wasn't addressed. I mean, there's a lot going on here. So long story short, when Emma came to us, this was in the middle of a lawsuit. And Emma's words were, you know, I had my veneers done, they keep breaking off. I wasn't sure I wanted veneers to start with, and the bottom line is, now what are we gonna do? So this is, I think, 3 or 4 months later, and this is Emma's 3rd set of veneers. And the good here is, I'm sorry, the 3rd set of provisionals. The good news here is that at least the shapes were improved. So the shapes are a little bit better at this point. But you can see she's getting some leakage, meaning that the provisionals aren't sealed. And they're not really, you get that kind of cement leakage happening underneath, and you see the discoloration happening underneath the restoration. So this is not good, right? And, you know, I always say in my lectures, think if this is your wife or your daughter or your sister and how you feel that, you know, something's not going right or well in the case. So really a big challenge. And it was such a mess that I don't even know where to begin. You know, it's funny when Dr. Miles and I went through this in Chicago, we kind of dove into the case a little bit more than I'm going to today. But just to be clear, I mean, look at all the things that are going on. This is kind of how the attempts were made, and you can see this overlap back here, and probably you're not helping the occlusal issue here. You could also see there's no real embrasure spaces created, and then also that it looks like one tooth is overlapping the other, and there's like a sharp point here. So it's just a mess. So it's kind of some poor dentistry. Also, there was some bacterial seepage because of the restorations weren't sealed very well. and she already had a root canal on one tooth. So the last thing we want to start getting is more decay on the margins, right? So things are kind of going bad here. Unfortunately, she found a great dentist in Dr. Miles Combe, and Miles went and started cleaning her up for some new temps and maybe some possible orthodontics to create a little space here. And if you actually look at some of the things that we evaluated, you know, you can see right away that the angulations of the preps and the fact that there was really no enamel left here was going to be a challenge for us. So it was a tough challenge for him. The other thing that was interesting, though, was we did have her final restorations not made by us. And I remember Dr. Miles calling me and saying, you know, I have these restorations that she got from the other doctor before she left, and why don't we try them in and see what they look like, and maybe we can gain some insight, meaning that we could put them in and say, hey, we love the incisal edge position, or we love them in general. Obviously, we're going to re-prepare the teeth, so we're probably gonna have to make them again, but at least we can learn from them and see the goods and bads of them. So we did. We placed them in, and we just kind of temp cemented them in place with a little Vaseline. It wasn't really cement. But notice some of the things you see right away. I mean, I hope most of you are looking at that and saying, wow, those don't look too good. And by the way, I don't know if you guys caught it, but I caught it right away. She was having some sort of an allergic reaction that day. This was not a lip injection of Botox or anything. She doesn't do that, but she had some sort of a bad allergic reaction to something, and her lips like really blew up. And it was kind of interesting because we kind of caught it later on when we were looking back at the case. But anyway, when you take a look at what you see there from a restorative point of view, and I never want to make fun of anybody else's restorations, because by the way, I've done plenty poorer ones myself over the years, but I think you can see there's a lot of poor aesthetic scenarios in here. The forms are okay, they're not fabulous, but realistically, this is a lithium disilicate material. I could tell, and it's just stained and glazed. There is no real secondary layering on it or micro layering, and it's just kind of a heavy amount of stain than a glazed surface. So it also kind of has this blue-gray look to it, which is very, very typical in lithium disilicate materials. But also notice what, if we start to look a little bit closer, look at the gingival health. And you can start to see, even with these restorations placed up there, that we're not getting great coloration out of the tissue. I get it, we're impinging the tissue a little bit right now, but you can also see that I'm not really getting light that's going to go up into this area of the tissue because of the restoration materials. So we kind of did all the normal things that we would normally do, meaning that we decided to do a little work moving the lower teeth to create a better envelope for her. And we knew that was going to take us about 6 or 8 months to do. And we decided that the best scenario for us to do at this point would be to provisionalize the case. So we actually started provisionalizing the case. And for me, I chose the anamic material for that. The anamic, from those of you who know, is a nano hybrid material. Do I use it on final restorations? Sometimes in implant world, but for long-term provisionals, occlusal buildups, occlusal tables, Vonways, I think it's really a great material. So being that we knew she was going to be in temporaries for a good 6-8 months, we decided to give her a good set of provisionals. And by the way, at this point, because of the lack of the enamel and the prepping that was already done, we were unfortunately going to have to start bringing her into more of a full contour restoration, which we didn't really want to do. But we really felt like she had enough damage in the teeth that we needed to give her a different restoration. So going to make the provisionals. We mill out our anamic materials to the cleaned up veneers. And you can see our veneers here were okay to bond at this point. I did a little set staining on them with the LC material, which I use for most of my anamic. I also use it for some denture cases and some composite things I do here along the lines. And we placed some provisionals on her. And you'll notice in the provisionalization, as we're starting to work, you see the Invisalign on the lower teeth to get them in and out of the way. I still think the teeth are a little bulbous and prepped out. So we were debating whether we were going to pull those teeth in with also a retainer, or because we were going to go full coverage at that point, that we'd kind of be okay just doing more of it in the prep work. So long-term provisionals were fine. And you can see that we got better seals on the margins, but again, look at how far back a lot of these margins are. And realistically, this is where I kind of start to go through the debate of, minimally invasive dentistry as compared to normal dentistry. And we kind of chose this case for our topic because the topic of the SCAT event in Chicago was minimally invasive dentistry. Well, somebody tried to be minimally invasive on this patient, but they didn't take into account that all you really saved after those aggressive preps was this little wall of enamel. And by the way, I would love to save that little wall of enamel across the board. The challenge is she didn't have that enamel in all the areas. Look at the wear facets and the chemical erosion that have now taken place on a lot of these teeth because of the functional issue. So you no longer have the strength of lingual enamel. I get that we could bond to dentin or enamel on the facial, and I know there's controversy in those statements, but I'm confident that it can be done. Problem is, because the lingual enamel is now worn, this is no longer a veneer case, especially if we use a harder material like a lithium disilicate that has a very hard, a non-flex to it, and now you have a tooth that has a high flexural rate because the lingual anatomy is all worn away, both functionally and chemically. So this is why we transitioned this to a full coverage restoration case. And once we did that, temps 6 months of ortho and temps later, we're going to start full coverage restoration. So we'll go through our normal process. And what is our normal process? Shade evaluation, managing the marginal positions, managing the space of the preps, and trying to not be too reductive. Also evaluating the prep shades, what the color of the prep shades are there any good and bad that we want to kind of evaluate as we're going through. And in the end, because we were going full coverage on this, I chose to use the ST material. It's pretty much what I use across the board these days, probably for 90% of my cases. And to be honest with you, most of the time, I'm either using the 1M1 or the white. Very rarely do I choose a different shade unless I'm using one of the multi-layered for monolithic. But in general, I kind of stay in those two worlds of either the white to get a real bright substructure or that 1M1-ish kind of a color. And I'm going to design my substructure exactly what I just did before to talking to you about. I'm going to take my zirconia copings and I'm going to cut them all back and do a facial margin cutback. So here's where my margins are going to come into play, just like they did before. Now I'm going to be able to bring some light into her gingiva, and I'm also going to be able to use this as my what was that term that everybody uses? My wash bake, right? That zirconia wash bake that everybody talks about. The only difference for me is I'm adding something that's more back to nature, because part of the challenges with most materials today is exactly what you're seeing here. In certain environments with certain types of light, the natural teeth have a fluorescence to them, but either anamic, lithium disilicate, zirconia, or metal ceramics do not get that same type of fluorescent material. So you don't have that same reflective index of the teeth, and that tends to make the teeth look a little bit different in natural environments. So for me, because this was a lithium disilicate, this was a zirconia case, I actually used VM9 on it. And I didn't use my margin materials, I just used my effect liner materials. And the effect liner materials are highly fluorescent, just like my margin materials, and they fire about 25 degrees higher than the normal dentins and enamels that I use. So it's kind of a nice win-win for me in the sense of my wash bake, because I'm not only getting my light into the tooth with my margin, but I'm also able to start doing more of my wash bake and filling my space with the amount of value or chroma that I want during that buildup. So I'm going to do exactly what I did for you before. I won't walk you through the actual buildup again. A chroma margin material here, or a liner material. In this case, I used EL3. EL3 liner material in the VM9 kit is kind of like a A2-ish and a half, A3. It's kind of in that ballpark. And then I also used my EL1, and EL1 is a very white liner material. And you'll notice I use that in the middle third of the tooth. I also used it up and down the line angles, and I kind of stopped it somewhat in the middle of the tooth because that's where the fluorescence in nature really ends. Although I just kind of feathered it out a little bit, so I kind of have that little bit of a natural breakup as it goes through. And when you look at my margin and liner material, or liner material, which is really what I use, I'm sorry, I'm calling it all three names today. I'm only calling it all three names because I just want you guys to realize a margin, a liner, and the power wash, all three of those materials are basically just highly fluorescent, higher firing materials. So you can call them any of the names you want, but for me, they're all just kind of fluorescent margin materials. That's what I'm really thinking of them as. And this is my final fluorescent wash bake that you guys do. So again, chroma in my cervical third, value in the middle third, and then a little bit of value up and down the line angles. And the reason I didn't go any further than that is because I'm going to be building full contour, and I can now control my build up with my other materials, which is kind of the way I like it. So after that, I did my normal ceramic layering where I would kind of build up my frame and create my mamelon structures. Let me kind of back up and walk through that a little bit for you. So after my wash or my margin bake is done, I'm going to come back and do what I would normally do. And what is that? I'm going to use a chroma dentin in the cervical third. So let me give you an example. If my final shade is going to be 1M1, I'm probably using maybe a 2R or a 1M2, depending on how much chroma I want in the cervical or how much chroma I had already put in the cervical with my marginal material. What we did in the Toronto course was we kind of stuck to just one or two dentins, right, to keep it simple, because I increased the chroma in the cervical with my marginal material, which means I didn't need to go with the crazy chroma dentin. I could actually just use 1M1 and 1M2 is all I used for dentin in the Toronto course. After that, I'm going to go to my brighter dentin. In this case, it was a 1M1 dentin, and then I'll finish that canvas off with my 1M1 dentin. So just two dentins at this point. And then I'll come back and I'll finish off my frame with my translucent blue material, and I'll paint my mamelons in. And I think you guys have seen me do a lot of ceramic buildups with mamelon materials and so forth down the line. And then I'll finalize the restoration. So we'll do our surface texture, polish, and glaze, and get everything, you know, nice and clean looking. You can see the little detail in the surface topography, and you can also see how nice the marginal seals are on my solid model, and also realize that there was cord pack here. So as soon as that, as soon as these are permanently cemented, we're going to get this peak of papilla popping back up, and I'm going to get my gingival material laying nicely over my supported ceramic material. So this will all go back to the doctor for day of delivery, and we had a pretty limited window once the patient came out of the ortho because we were kind of pushing to get this case done for Chicago a few weeks ago. So our final photos at this point were really the day of insertion. We didn't get the patient back later on, but we will. I think she actually did come in this week, if I'm not mistaken. When Miles gets the case, he's going to go through a little Zerclean process. He does that with those Zerconia materials, and that really helps with the cementation and the bond. So again, the usual beautiful Miles pictures that he always takes. One of them is prettier than the other in his pictures, which is kind of always nice. This is on insertion, so as he's inserting the restorations, the pink, I think you can already see is starting to look good, but it's going to look even better after that heals up. And you can see how nice the gingival, even on the day of insertion, is kind of starting to surround the tooth and start to fill in the papilla areas, and how nice the tissue looks on the insertion day. So that's always a great sign for us. And I think I'm looking forward to seeing the finals, which I should hopefully have the final pictures on in the next week or two. And again, from here to what was going on to here, I think it's a nice result for our patient. And this is her kind of smiling the day that she's leaving. Again, day of insertion. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the finals, which I believe he took either this week, or I think he actually took them already. So I've been traveling, so I'm a little out of it. But I think that's kind of the point that I wanted to make here, right? Is how we're actually utilizing our materials. So I think I'm close to on time. We're not bad. I'm a little fast today, Jim, so that's good. That'll give us a little more time for questions and for me to get back to work, because I have 2 cases that I have to finish up today.
Yeah, no problem.
I want to say thank you again for Jim always picking these cool topics and challenging me to to find other ways to teach them, and it's kind of a fun challenge sometimes. And I think that case for Emma came really great, and my compliments to Dr. Miles, who did some of the amazing photography on that case. So I hope you guys get the value of what I'm doing with the marginal materials and why I'm doing them, and why they're still really important for our ceramics today, to really understand the light transmission and how to use them especially. And I'm a big supporter that building isn't dead. I know everybody acts like it is. Well, look behind me on all the cases on my bench, and I'm building every one of them, and I can't keep up with them, to be honest with you. So don't think that the only way to compete in the market is just by being faster, stronger, or cheaper with the monolithics. Add to them, make them better, and embrace the digital technology, but embrace it where you're improving on it at the end. So with that said, I'll say thank you, and hopefully you got some questions out there for me, Jim. And thanks for having me, and I'll give you back the screen.
All right. Yeah, we do have some questions. Thanks, Peter. It's something that we forget about, since it used to be considered yesteryear, right, about doing the margins.
Yeah, interesting.
So, yeah.
I think it's more, to add to your point of what you just said, I think I stated it clearly in the beginning, but just to make really sure everybody was clear. I've always done metal ceramics with ceramic margins. When I started Zerconia, and Zerconia back in the day was white and chalky, right? It was really dead looking, and we were again doing ceramic margins. And over the period of time, it's slightly changed because the Zerconia is approved. But today I realize that I'm back to doing ceramic margins on 90% of my Zerconia restorations.
Well, like everything else in the world, what's old is new, right?
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it.
All right, before we get to the questions, a few things. CE, those of you who are asking about CE, yes, you'll get your CE letter or CE information as soon as we post the recording up on the VITA North America YouTube channel. So that will provide you with the CE hours of this. The workshop has been recorded. It will be posted in a day or two on the VITA North America website, so please go visit us. We have a bunch of sales reps and the help desk to help you if you haven't run into anything. I know Peter's been gracious enough to provide you with the information, contact information of himself. Make sure though that you understand that Peter is in and out and very busy. So if he doesn't get back to you right away, give him some time to respond. In the meantime, you can call the help desk here or one of the local reps in your area. This is the help desk information here. And then if you want to join us for a couple other webinars we have scheduled for this year, December 7th, December 21st, and then we start our 2024 next year. If you're interested in going to a denture course at VITA Germany, we do have those scheduled in June of next year, which is a very cool course workshop. You spend 2 days in a workshop. It's a 2-day hands-on workshop, and then the rest of the week you are going to go see maybe a winery, go to a brewery, do other odds and ends to see sightsee. So please join us if you can.
Why can't we combine that and do a 2-day denture course there, a 2-day ceramic course there, and then all the people can go on the same winery tour? We could do a combination course.
We can certainly look into that. Yeah, of course.
That might be fun for cutting all the ceramics out with a denture course. What about the ceramics? We can't do something?
Yeah, it seems like the denture has always been more popular, but however, with 2024, people are going back to a little bit more of traveling. So you very well could be able to do that with a ceramic course as well. 2-day ceramic course, probably Lumex AC, and then the rest of the week would be sightseeing as well. So let me look into that, and maybe we can put that together for everyone.
That'd be fun to do.
When we do this, we have enough seats for 12, so it is limited. However, you can bring a companion. All you really pay for on the companion is your just the hotel and your airfare and things like that. On the hands-on, if you're going to be a hands-on participant, it's a little bit higher fee for that. But yep, definitely can happen for 2024, Peter. This is Peter's information again. And let's get to some of these questions here. So one of the first questions is, in the future, I'd like to see you build and discuss the molar or bicuspid.
Ooh, I like that. Okay.
Yep.
Jim, we just got the first course topic for 2024.
I know,
Posterior
right?
building.
Makes our life easier. We can get them loaded and get them on the books, on the schedule for next year.
I like that.
Are you using the white fluorescence on all shades?
Predominantly. So yes, I'm almost always using a white or brighter. And when I'm in anywhere from, let's say, A2, A1 and higher, it's almost always pure white. Obviously, if I'm doing an A3 or an A4 kind of case, then no, I wouldn't use the white. I would kind of drop it down and maybe use an A1 or a B1 or something with a little bit of a value of brightness to it. But excuse me, not as much or as high when I'm going into the ones or the zero shades.
All right. And then,
also, you know what? Sorry, let me add to that too, Jim, because it also depends on the material, right? So if I'm in VM9 or 13, I feel like the value is there. On the Lumex, the value is a little off on the zeros and ones. So on the Lumex, I'm almost always going straight to the LL0 because I want to get my value up a little bit more to compensate for the low fusing powders, which tend to be a hair lower in value.
all right. Next two questions are kind of interrelated. One is if you had a ceramic margin break off a zirconia crown.
You know what? I'm going to knock on wood, but I've never had one break off that I'm aware of. So let me not jinx myself. But no, I've never had that happen. I'm sure it could, but I haven't had that happen.
And then the other related question is to do the margin for zirconia, do you raise the temperature higher than what the book says, or do you do anything special on the firing?
Not at all. So when I'm firing a margin material, a liner material, they're almost always 20 to 35 degrees higher than the actual dentin. So the best example is in VM9, the dentin fires at 910. Your margin material or your liner material is 930, 935. You can even push it to. So it's 20, 25 degrees higher. And the niceness about that in your wash bay is you're getting everything you need, and it has no disruption to the dentins and that you're going to fire because of the lower temperatures later on.
All right. And then what instrument do you use to cut back? Do you use a specialized instrument to cut back your margin?
No, I use the that blue, it's like a blue diamond impregnated rubber wheel. I can't think of which company it's from right now, but if you want to know, just send me an email and I'll send you a picture of it. But it's basically a really aggressive blue, and I use it a lot for when I'm thinning out my margins and finalizing my zirconia copings before I start to put ceramic on them. It's not the normal blue that you guys are thinking of. It's kind of a thicker one, and it's pretty.
Dialite?
I can't think of the name of the company, but email me and I'll send you a picture of it.
Great. And then kind of a little bit off topic, but do you find a difference between a digital model of I assume a printed digital model and a plaster model?
So the answer is yes, 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 yes. You know, it's so hard, right? Because I get it, we're in a digital world and everybody wants to do everything digitally, but in my office, there's a few requirements here. First off, single central world, if you ever looked at a stone, and I have, it's in a lecture actually, if you ever looked at a digital impression, let's just say of the number 8, and we have to do the number 9, you know, and you look at the same stone impression of the number 8, and I have to do the number 9, it's two completely different worlds. There's no surface topography, there's no ability for us to really see, and that's just the surface. When you look at the joint between the gingival and the actual tooth itself, also not very accurate in the digital world. So this is where I kind of draw the line on some of the digital things. I know we all want to get all your doctors want to kind of print everything and mill everything and scan everything, but they have to be more diligent in their cord pack, more diligent in their tissue management, and we have to be way more diligent and maybe even draw a line sometimes where we say what we will do and we won't. So my answer is I don't do single centrals on digital models, and I try not to do veneer cases on digital models. Those still have to be physical impressions to me. Everything else after that, I can kind of work through.
All right. Yeah, it still has a ways to go for details. So we have a couple more questions left. So if anybody else that's listening, if you have any questions, please send them in. Otherwise, we'll get through the last couple of questions and let Peter go for the day. Another question is for your metal abutments, the case that you showed, I assume that you did a gold casting. Do you do an opaque, what we would call a wash opaque first, or do you just do a thicker one, or?
So I'm not sure if the way they worded it. So on that particular case, we cast a gold ceramic alloy to the actual UCLA abutment, and then we kind of carved that out. And yes, we opaqued it and then put ceramic margin material on it. So it kind of got the best of both worlds. I said before though too, the only other time that I would change that concept, let's say it was a titanium abutment, because you don't want to cast. I don't blame you for that today, it's expensive. So you had a titanium abutment milled. Well, you have the option of doing the opaque and things with Lumex materials or other materials. I'm not in the favor of that. I would rather just use a composite bonded material and composite my opaque, composite my marginal material, and then also composite the actual abutment itself. And this way I have kind of all the color that I want, and then I can make a zirconian coping over that and do the ceramic margin. Only one more trick I'll add to that though is when I'm doing a screw mentable, meaning that I've made the abutment, I've opaqued the abutment, and now I made a zirconia coping over that I'm going to cement on. I'm not cementing them these days when we're sending them out of the lab. And the reason we're not cementing them is because when we cement them, when the doctor tries them in, if the shade is a little off or they want to add a contact or they want to make an adjustment, when it comes back to the lab, we now have to burn it out. And we have to burn the coping off. I'm losing the composite, which I'm also burning off in the oven. So what we've changed that to is, especially in the anterior, we're letting the doctors do the final cementation for the anterior teeth. This way, if it's all good, put it in. If it's not, send it back and I'll make the adjustment before it's cemented.
All right. What's the difference between a glaze with vacuum and without vacuum?
The glaze with vacuum is better. And the real reasoning behind that for me, you know, let me back up and say, in truth, there's not much of a difference, right? But I've always kind of been under the belief that why would we fire a ceramic without a vacuum if we don't need to? And here's where I think it goes off skew. You see, years ago when metals were bad and we didn't understand bonding and you didn't want to fire the crown over and over again, because the more you fired it, you eventually got gases trapped or something would happen and you start getting some of the gas to pop through into your metal crowns. Well, let's be honest, if you're still getting that today, you're doing something really wrong, right? So for me, when your ceramic is under vacuum, it tends to really keep that ceramic in a set position, and it also helps to pull any moisture out of the ceramic as much as it can consistently. I'm under the habit of glazing in vacuum most of the time. The only time I don't feel a need to glaze in vacuum is when I'm doing a little add-on in the sense of I just want to reglaze the tooth and it's monolithic. Or I baked it a lot of times and I don't want to kind of incorporate any more vacuum to increase the chance of pulling a bubble or something out. But is there a major difference? I don't think the eye can detect a difference between a non-vacuum and a vacuum glaze, honestly.
All right. All right, last question. Is your brush on the market now?
It's currently not. there's been a lot of hair issues, and I'm working on a new one with 2 different companies with samples, and it's been really challenging. So, and you know, the other part of it that's kind of annoying, most of the companies who always wanted to build my brush are kind of like, oh, people aren't building ceramics anymore, so why should we spend worries about that? And I say we still need ceramics. So I'm working on one, but it's a little more challenging.
All right, Peter, again, thank you very much for bringing forth a lot of good information on, you know, the perfect fit for margins, and gave a lot of information that is useful for sure for a lot of us. So I appreciate your time. Any last minute comments you want to make?
Yeah, the only thing that I probably didn't say this whole time, and it just hit me when you said that, is my margin bakes are sometimes 1, meaning that I could get everything done in 1 margin bake if I didn't cut the coping back very far. If I need to, I would do the first margin bake first, and then do my second margin bake with the rest of my wash on the coping for the second one. And then the third thing is, in the end, whether I do 1 or 2, sometimes when I'm final glazing the crown, I might do a little tiny seal on that margin with another material. So just so it's all clear to everybody, but that's it. That's everything that I got for today. And Jim and I are going to start working on some topics for 2024. So I think one of them is 100% going to be posterior buildups. So I appreciate that. Suggestions you have, you can send to me or Jim, and we'll have fun making up some new topics for next year.
All right, well, thank you, Peter, again, and thank you everyone that's joined us today. This will conclude another VITA Academy webinar, and everyone have a good day wherever you're at. Peter, thanks again. Get on with the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Have a great holiday month for everybody, and see you guys next year.